look around you right now. I mean, the
Hmm.
clothes you're wearing, the screen you're looking at, the complex supply chains delivering your food. It's all powered by this black, foul-smelling sludge made of cooked, prehistoric ocean plankton.
Right. It's literally just ancient biomass.
Exactly. Welcome to Talking Miles by noonwave.com. We're looking at a stack of sources today that trace the unbelievable story of how this ancient sludge completely redrew the map of the modern world.
It's a fascinating trajectory, really. We're going to examine how crude oil evolved from, well, a literal medicinal curiosity into the ultimate geopolitical weapon.
Yeah.
And we'll decode how today's headline-making global conflicts are actually just invisible wars over oil supply chains.
So to really understand the scale of modern oil geopolitics,
Yeah.
you have to rewind to 1854 in Pennsylvania. People were finding this dark sludge seeping out of the ground, right?
Yeah.
And they were soaking it up with rags and selling it as a cure for joint pain and horse ailments.
Yeah, horse ailments. And George Bissell, who was a New York lawyer, he observed this and saw a totally different utility. At the time, homes were lit by whale oil, which was becoming prohibitively expensive. So Bissell hired a Yale chemist, Professor Benjamin Silliman, for exactly $526.08.
Wait, exactly $526.08.
Yep. To see if this rock oil could be distilled into an illuminant to replace the whale oil.
Let's pause on that distillation process for a second because it's foundational. Silliman wasn't just filtering dirt out of the sludge. He was using fractional distillation,
Right.
basically heating the crude oil so that the different hydrocarbon chains separate based on their boiling points, The lighter molecules turn into gas at lower temperatures and rise, while heavier ones stay at the bottom.
Exactly. And Silliman proved you could extract a clean-burning middle fraction, which is essentially kerosene, for lighting.
But the chemical process was only half the battle, right? I mean, squeezing rags couldn't meet industrial demand.
No, not at all. So the investors hired Edwin L. Drake. He was a 38-year-old former railroad conductor with severe back pain, and they hired him simply because his free train pass saved them travel expenses.
That's hilarious. They sent him to Pennsylvania, and they even faked the title of colonel on his letters, right? Just to command respect from the locals.
Yeah, they really did. And Drake decided to drill down into the bedrock for oil, kind of adapting the techniques used by salt drillers.
Which didn't go well at first.
No, I mean, after a year of broken equipment and public mockery, his investors actually sent a letter firing him.
Ouch.
But on August 27, 1859, literally a few days before that letter arrived, his drill bit hit 60 feet, and they found a dark liquid floating in the pipe.
Talk about timing. And that moment triggered the Pennsylvania oil rush. But it was governed by this wild legal concept called the rule of capture.
Right, the rule of capture.
It basically dictated that if you drilled a hole on your land, whatever you pumped out belonged to you, even if the subterranean reservoir extended under your neighbor's property.
It treated oil like a wild animal. If you catch it, it's yours.
Which creates a frantic incentive to just drain the reservoir as fast as possible before the guy next door does.
Yeah.
So the landscape quickly became this chaotic forest of wooden derricks.
And out of that chaos emerged John D. Rockefeller. He recognized that the drilling phase was, well, it was too unpredictable, too capital intensive.
Right.
The true control point was the bottleneck, logistics, refining the crude and transporting it. So he established Standard Oil, positioning himself right between the oil fields and the major population centers.
Rockefeller's transportation strategy is honestly a masterclass in ruthless consolidation. He negotiated a deal with the major railroads guaranteeing them steady freight volume.
Yeah.
But in exchange, he demanded they not only give him a discount, but they actually had to double the shipping rates for all of his competitors. The drawback scheme.
It's unbelievable.
Wait, so Rockefeller negotiated a deal where his competitors were essentially paying him a cut of their shipping fees every time they used the train. That's diabolical. That's like a FedEx competitor getting a cut of your shipping costs every time you mail a package.
It really is. He systematically weaponized the infrastructure. Rockefeller proved that controlling the distribution of energy is vastly more powerful than owning the raw resource itself.
A lesson modern superpowers would definitely adopt later.
Oh, absolutely. By bankrupting or absorbing his rivals, he built a near-total monopoly. Standard Oil demonstrated that oil was no longer just a commodity, it was a mechanism of absolute market control.
And that mechanism of control inevitably expanded beyond domestic borders and, well, intersected with the engines of war. But first, Rockefeller's domestic monopoly faced a massive international challenge from Marcus Samuel.
Right, the London merchant whose father sold seashells. Samuel realized that breaking Rockefeller's grip on the Asian market required a huge leap in transportation efficiency.
So what did he do?
He commissioned the first fleet of heavy metal oil tankers, specifically designed to safely navigate the newly opened Suez Canal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He shipped bulk oil directly to Asia and packaged it locally in bright red cans. It was a direct marketing strike against Standard Oil's blue cans.
Brilliant.
And he flooded the market with cheaper kerosene. That enterprise eventually became Shell.
So you have this fierce competition between Shell and Standard Oil pushing oil into every corner of the globe. But the real paradigm shift, the structural shift in its importance, happened in 1911 with the British Navy.
Right. Winston Churchill, as First Lord of the Admiralty, recognized the threat of an industrializing Germany. So he made this massive gamble to switch the fleet's fuel source from domestic coal to imported oil.
The mechanical advantages were definitely there, right? I mean, a coal-fired battleship required hundreds of men constantly shoveling coal into massive furnaces. It was exhausting, slow, and worst of all, the black smoke gave away the ship's position to enemies miles away.
Exactly. Oil, on the other hand, burned much cleaner, required a fraction of the manpower, and offered incredible speed and stealth.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Isn't it an insane national security risk to switch your entire military defense to a fuel your country doesn't even naturally have?
It was a massive risk. Churchill knew Britain possessed abundant coal but zero domestic oil. So, to mitigate that fear, the British government executed an unprecedented maneuver.
What did they do?
They purchased a 51% ownership stake in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which we know today as BP.
Wow.
By doing so, they formally tethered their national survival to the oil fields of the Middle East.
And that decision essentially mechanized the First World War, introducing internal combustion engines in tanks, supply trucks, and early aircraft. But the Second World War really proved that modern warfare was entirely dictated by access to crude.
Absolutely. Germany entered the Second World War with a highly advanced military but almost no domestic petroleum. So Hitler relied heavily on synthetic fuel.
Right, hydrogenation.
Yes. German chemists subjected domestic coal to extreme heat and pressure with a catalyst to create a liquid synthetic petroleum.
But that's highly energy intensive and super difficult to scale under wartime conditions, isn't it?
It is. The output just couldn't match the consumption of a multi-front war. By 1942, the German military was starving for fuel.
Which forced a catastrophic pivot.
Exactly. Hitler invaded Russia purely to capture the Soviet oil fountains of Baku. That decision to split his forces led directly to his disastrous defeat at Stalingrad.
And once the Allies realized that ending the Nazi war machine just required shutting off the fuel tap, they shifted their strategy.
Right.
They started bombing German synthetic fuel plants, like the Leuna facility.
And the effect was instant. Without fuel, the Luftwaffe's advanced fighter planes sat grounded. Panzer divisions had to literally abandon their tanks and use horses and oxen to tow artillery.
That visual's just crazy.
It established an unshakable truth. Without secure access to oil, a nation simply cannot project military power.
Which triggered a post-war scramble by Western powers to permanently secure the Middle East. It wasn't a free market thing at all. It was heavily orchestrated diplomacy.
Oh, totally. Just look at the 1928 Red Line Agreement. Western diplomats literally used a ruler and pencil to draw a red line around the map of the Middle East, agreeing to carve it up and develop the region collaboratively.
Keeping the nations weak and the oil controlled by Western corporations, the so-called Seven Sisters.
Right. They extracted the wealth, paid local governments pennies, and kept them entirely dependent.
So the West thought they had this permanently secured, treating these Middle Eastern countries almost like tenant farmers. But the producers eventually realized they held the keys to the global economy.
They did. In 1960, tired of being paid fractional royalties, several oil-producing nations formed OPEC.
To take back pricing power.
Exactly. And initially, Western executives just laughed at them. They dismissed OPEC as a loose collective.
Until 1973.
Right. During the Yom Kippur War, in response to U.S. support for Israel, OPEC weaponized oil for the first time. They instituted a coordinated embargo.
They bypassed the Seven Sisters entirely, cut supply, and prices quadrupled, right? From $2.90 to over $11 a barrel.
The macroeconomic result was stagflation, high inflation, and a stagnant economy. It forced a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit in the U.S. and shattered the illusion of American invincibility.
It proved OPEC, largely guided by Saudi Arabia, controlled the throttle of the world. And Saudi Arabia's influence is unique because of this concept called spare capacity. Can you explain that?
Sure, so most oil-producing nations pump at maximum capacity to generate revenue. But Saudi Arabia acts as the central bank of oil. They have vast reserves and low extraction costs, so they intentionally maintain the infrastructure to pump millions of additional barrels per day, but they hold it in reserve.
So they can rapidly increase supply to crash prices or withhold it to drive them up.
Exactly. It's a potent geopolitical tool.
And we saw that tool used aggressively in 2014 against the United States. American companies had heavily invested in fracking.
Right. Fracking is a technological marvel, but it's incredibly expensive. You're injecting millions of gallons of water and chemicals underground to shatter dense shale rock.
It costs way more to extract a barrel of shale oil than conventional Saudi crude. So when the U.S. fracking boom threatened Saudi market share, everyone expected Saudi Arabia to cut production to keep prices high.
But they didn't. They flooded the market. Prices crashed from over $100 to under $30 a barrel.
So what does this all mean? Saudi Arabia essentially held its breath underwater, knowing they had bigger lungs, just waiting for the American frackers to drown first.
That is exactly what happened. At $30 a barrel, U.S. shale companies couldn't cover their high costs. Dozens of them went bankrupt. Saudi Arabia proved that oil is a ruthless geopolitical weapon used to punish rivals.
But if oil is such a powerful weapon, and it generates so much money, why are so many oil-rich nations suffering from extreme poverty and corruption?
Ugh, that's what political scientists call the resource curse, or the paradox of plenty. It breaks a foundational contract between a state and its citizens.
Because the government gets billions directly from foreign oil companies, so they no longer need citizen taxes, right?
Precisely. Without taxes, the accountability loop is severed. The government ignores the people. Plus, petroleum extraction is an enclave industry. It requires imported heavy machinery and specialized engineers.
It doesn't create mass jobs.
Exactly. The wealth concentrates at the top, leading to extreme poverty, corruption, and the funding of paramilitaries in places like Nigeria, Angola, and Colombia.
And beyond the internal struggles, there's the geographic fragility of the supply chains. The world's oil flows through these tiny, fragile veins, global choke points.
Yes. The Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide, but it carries a fifth of global oil.
And the Strait of Malacca is even tighter, only 2.8 kilometers wide.
Which creates the Malacca dilemma for China. If a rival naval power blocked that narrow gap, the Chinese economy would shut down within weeks.
It's terrifying when you think about it. And then there's Bab el-Mandeb in Djibouti, a tiny country with zero oil, but a premium location linking the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea.
Right. It's heavily militarized. You have rival superpowers, the US, China, France, Japan, all maintaining military footprints there, just staring at each other to protect the ships.
So when we see headlines about military operations or diplomatic standoffs in these regions, we aren't just looking at local border disputes. We're watching superpowers guard the literal arteries of the global economy.
Exactly. Impartially speaking, look at the geopolitics surrounding Venezuela.
The Orinoco Belt, right. Heavy crude.
Yes, U.S. military and diplomatic interest in Venezuela is a strategic move. If the U.S. can oust unfavorable leadership and access that heavy crude, they can undercut Saudi pricing power and remove Chinese influence in the region.
It's all geopolitical chess, and it all ties back to the petrodollar.
Yes, the petrodollar is the anchor of this whole system. In 1974, the U.S. struck a deal. Saudi oil is sold exclusively in U.S. dollars in exchange for American military protection.
Which forces the entire world to hold U.S. dollars just to buy energy.
Right. It creates an artificial global demand for American currency, funding U.S. deficit spending and global military supremacy.
So attacks on refineries or blockades in the Strait of Hormuz aren't just local emergencies. They are direct threats to the petrodollar system itself.
Absolutely. The seemingly chaotic landscape of foreign policy becomes highly rational when you view it through the lens of protecting these supply chains and the petrodollar.
It's an astonishing realization. We've traced this journey From George Bissell spending $500 on a medicinal curiosity to a world where superpowers will redraw maps, deploy drones, and risk global war just to control a narrow strait of water and the black gold flowing through it.
It really is the invisible engine of the modern world order.
Which leaves you with a brand new, frankly provocative thought to consider. If the entire foundation of modern global supremacy, the petrodollar, the military presence at these choke points, is built on the absolute necessity of crude oil, what happens if the green energy transition actually succeeds?
That is the ultimate question.
Right. If oil loses its crown, do these heavily guarded choke points become obsolete overnight? Or will we just end up carving up the map all over again for lithium and cobalt? Something to think about. Thank you for joining this in-depth exploration on Talking Miles by noonwave.com. Keep learning, keep questioning,